Welcome to the WWIA Podcast. Whether you're a regular subscriber to the podcast or if this is your first time giving us a listen, we're honored to have you join us today. The mission of WWIA is to serve our nation's combat-wounded Purple Heart recipients by providing world-class outdoor sporting activities as a means to recognize and honor their sacrifice, encourage independence and connection with communities, and promote healing and wellness through camaraderie and a shared passion for the outdoors. One of the questions that we get on occasion pertaining to our mission is, how exactly does that work? What does that mean exactly? It's a great question, and on today's episode, WWIA Founder and CEO John McDaniel answers that question for us, giving clarity and detail behind how our mission and events unfold. Let's join John now as we get an inside look on this How It Works episode of the WWIA Podcast.
Yeah, so here I am in the AIR stream. You can hear the music in the background. I'm at McDaniel Air Force Base in Florida, in Tampa, in the AIR stream, recording the podcast. And happy to be doing it, too. So what I thought I'd do today is talk a little bit about how it works. You know, the foundation. Turn that down. That brought to you by The Who. Thank you very much. Yeah, so I thought I'd talk today about, you know, how the foundation, you know, how it works, how the events work. It seems to be something that comes up, you know, not infrequently, and especially, you know, as the organization grows and people want to know more and more about what's really happening out there and, you know, why it works and what's really going on. I've had people come up to me and say, you know, I don't even know what you're doing. And they go, well, you know, that doesn't happen so much anymore, but, you know, it used to happen quite a lot. Like, okay, I got it. You got this thing going on with these veterans, but what are you really doing? And so today I thought I would spend a little bit of time of your valuable time and describe what's happening out there, what's really happening. So I'll just call this, you know, how it works. And so, you know, at the end of the day, let me kind of describe, you know, a standard WWIA mission, if you will, you know, how it's devised, how it's planned, and how it's executed, and then the follow-up. And I guess I've always described that as sort of, you know, in baseball terms, as the wind-up, the pitch, and of course the follow-through. So that's what I plan to do today is chat about, you know, these activities that we're doing, and maybe there'll be somebody out there that says to him or herself, you know, I could do that, or, you know, I'm interested in doing that. And so, you know, to kick it off, I thought I would, you know, would mention a testimonial that I discovered last week, late last week. I was piling through. I was in the office there in Apollo Beach, and I was piling through some old financials, trying to sort through, you know, what should we save and what should we throw away, you know, or purge a little bit. And I found a testimonial from a Vietnam veteran, and I'd have to go back and look at the date, but it's at least 10 years old. And it's so amazing to me sometimes how you know, I will get a hold of something and go, you know, this person has grabbed onto something that we're doing that is important or highlights an aspect of our mission set that I would not have thought of. And in this case, this great Vietnam veteran said, and I'll paraphrase here, said essentially in a handwritten note to me that was shoved in a, you know, in one of the, you know, files. I don't know how I got in the financial files, but it was there. And I pulled it out and took a picture of it, and I sent it off to one of the staff members and said, make sure this gets digitized. And if you're interested, on our website, you can go to WWIF.org and pull down the testimonials. They're right there on the website. Easy to find, but I think there's over 1,000 of them. You know, been at this for 17 years, and this one will be in there somewhere now too. But you know, he basically said, listen, you know, when I got back from Vietnam, you know, we meaning the veterans, turned to each other. They had very low expectations of, what the society was going to do for them at that point, because most of the society, had turned their back on these great Americans who were off fighting, a war, in Asia and in Vietnam, and when they came home, the welcome was not say great. Okay, there wasn't a lot. There was no ticker tape parade, et cetera, et cetera. But he said, what you're doing is awesome in the sense of you're involving. And this is the key. You're involving non-veterans in this. In this mission set. And I was, I paused for a moment and I was like, wow, that's, he's absolutely right. And I think last count, there was something like 5,000 volunteers that we, whose support that we rely upon in, 50 different missions in 35 different states now. So, the foundation's grown considerably over the years. And I would venture to say, and I was talking with another staff member today about that idea. We don't have precise figures by any means. It's a pretty dynamic space, but I would venture to say that 95% of the people that are involved in this mission are non-veterans. So if you're out there wondering, I can't get involved or I shouldn't get involved because I never served our country. Bull hockey. Okay, that's not true. You should get involved if you have it in your heart to help our nation's combat wounded Purple Heart recipients. Then we have a place for you, especially if you're somebody who's interested in the great outdoors. Connecting our heroes with each other. Connecting them with the great outdoors and communities, who care, and that's really, that's what we do. So anyway, I digress a little bit there, but, I just wanted that, I wanted to go on record as saying that, for those of you that are out there listening to this thinking, geez, I would like to get involved, or I'm a little apprehensive about getting involved, don't be apprehensive. And by the way, I am here at McDaniel Air Force Base inside of the Airstream. So if there's some noise that comes by, which I'm listening to right now, and you probably heard that, I wouldn't be surprised if a fighter jet flew over. And so we're just going to let that roll because it's the sound of freedom and it's awesome. I saw some A-10s on the flight strip and some fighter jets, fighter and attack jets, and of course, McDaniel Air Force Base is the home of Central Command and SOCOM. Special Operations Command, two of the most powerful commands, I think, in our nation's mighty military. And there's also a whole squadron of KC-135s, which are the refuelers. So lots of activity here. So just bear with us if we get some outside ambient distractions as they may occur. But anyway, go back to this thing. Okay, the wind up, the pitch and the follow through. How does it work? Okay, so first off, I want everybody to understand that we don't pay anybody. Okay, to do this mission. We don't go out and we don't even ask anybody. Okay, we don't even ask for your help. All right, so we 100% of the people that have reached out to us in these 50 missions across the country that are now fully matured, some of which are going on 15, 16, and 17 years. Every single one of these people that are hosting an event, and we'll talk about that in a second, what that word event means, are people that found us or found me and said, I want to help you. I believe in what you're doing, and I want to get involved. So that's it's a very important distinction to highlight that. We're not calling people up and saying, hey, we got these great heroes that are combat wounded, all of whom have earned a Purple Heart. Would you help us? We don't do that. So it's all been organic, slow growth. People finding out about us primarily, I think, through word of mouth, the heroes that we've served, and communities as they, grow and expand. So anyway, so we now have a place on our website. It's called Host an Event, and you can go on there and click on it and fill out an application for helping us. Tell us what your idea is. You want to do this, world-class outdoor sporting event, hunting or fishing of some sort, and that's your idea. And then, of course, my staff gets involved once we, look at it and do a little vetting process. And then we shape the idea, go ahead and engage the host, because you leave us your contact information. And then that's where the dialogue starts, and then the planning starts. But at the end of the day, these things are basically long weekends. The heroes, and I'll talk about that in a second, selecting heroes. But, the heroes are flying from all over the country. Okay, we don't just go, oh, we're having an event in Florida, let's take Florida guys. That's an easy, cheap way to doing it, but we're not into easy and we're not into cheap. And oh, by the way, if you live in Florida, hunting, or fishing for, say, snook on the bay, isn't a big deal. Why? Because you live there and you do it all the time. Same thing with Wisconsin. You guys want to go deer hunting? Dude's like, yeah, well, I live here. I deer hunt half the year, all season long. So, but however, if you live in Tupelo, Mississippi, as an example, and you've never been to Wisconsin and you'd love to go to Wisconsin and you've always, fantasized about hunting a big whitetail buck or catching a muskie, now that's a deal. Okay. And that's what we do. Okay. So anyway, we engage the host, we kind of shape the idea a little bit, and then we plan it with detailed planning. And then ultimately we kick out an operations order. I'll get to that in a minute, an op order, because it's like our little contract. This is how we do business. And it's very detailed. And as you'd expect. And in that process, there's a lot of uncertainty that gets removed or erased, or certainly diminished. And, we like to make sure that the heroes are comfortable. And I don't like surprises, really, unless, you want to, bake a cake for me or something like that. Those kind of surprises are great. But typically, we don't like surprises. I don't think anybody does, especially when it's like, okay, this was not in the plan. These guys have had enough uncertainty in their life, okay? So we try very hard to tell them, hey, what's going to happen, lay it out. And that's what the operations order is. It's 5 paragraphs. We'll chat about that in a second. It's been the topic of discussed on other podcasts, I think, that we've had, but I'll get into that a little bit. But anyway, so the other thing we tell the host when we're chatting with them, as a condition, is we say, listen, and I just put it on the table, man. You can't help it. This is expensive business. Each one of these missions, when you get all said and done, it's probably $15,000 to $20,000, okay, to do a mission, in kind and cash. You can't buy, a plane ticket as an example with, in kind donation unless it's, from, a sponsor like, our great folks at Hero Miles. They donate a lot of flights to us, and that's a huge, wonderful gift. But there are some things that we do that help keep our costs down. Tons of in-kind contributions. We're not paying the host to do their job, which is a volunteer mission. So a lot of the expense, if you will, is absorbed in an in-kind contribution. That's how we're able to do that. So but anyway, we do tell the host, to help cover our base, our administrative base and other, unforeseen, expenditures, everything from, licenses to chow to baggage reimbursement, the flights for the guides, et cetera, et cetera. There's lots of costs associated with doing this business, getting 4 or 5 guys or gals, whatever the case might be, from 4 or 5 different locations across the country to a new location, a central location, to assemble and conduct this mission. That's expensive business, to do that and to do that properly. So we do tell our hosts up front, hey, listen, we want you to engage your community and do a fundraising activity. If you got deep pockets and you don't mind, pulling $5,000 or $6,000 out of your pocket, to start with, hey, boo shakallah. That's fantastic. I don't really care, how you do it, but I'm asking you to do it because it's important. We can't do this. We can't grow without it. We can't be in, we can't, the operations have got to be in the black. Okay, and that's just the bottom line. There's a business component to it that makes this wheel spin, and we very politely and graciously say, please do a fundraiser for us with a target of $5,000 or $6,000. And some of these missions that are now very mature, they have all kinds of amazing fundraising activities, and they surpass that amount, which is great. We're a charity. We rely upon philanthropy. Money is the fuel that keeps the hamsters on the wheels, and the heroes on the mission. So anyway, for all those that are out there doing this and listening to this, I'm preaching to the choir, but thank you. And it's super important. So that's kind of the devised part. So the missions are devised that way, shaped, and then there's some dialogue between us and the host, and then we go, okay, this is it, we got it, and then of course we have to select the heroes, and that's an interesting thing. Karina Hart does that for us. She's a full-time inside staff member, and I used to do that job, many years ago, and I called it dialing for dollars, And you go, what about this database? Well, this is our database, it took us 17 years to compile a database full of Purple Heart heroes, but every one of them found the website and elected to fill out some basic fundamental data, tell us who they are, and we vet them. We make sure that their Purple Hearts are in fact legitimate, and we ask for a recognition photo so that when you rock up at the airport, we can identify you. And so anyway, some basic data, and we also ask them, of course we get we make them validate or we validate their Purple Heart. They got to send us the documentation that proves that they are who they are and they have those credentials. So it's all up and up, and nobody has any problems with that. And so we're all good. But at the end of the day, in that application, when they first fill out an application, they're telling us. We ask them. There's a segment in there so we say, hey, tell us about your preferences. What would you like to do? This is like it's a dream sheet. It's a wish list, and on there is everything from dangerous game animals, which P.S. happens to be the most popular category that's requested by the heroes. They have dangerous game animals. They've all been in combat, shot and blown up, and sometimes several times, and they still want to go out and hunt dangerous game animals. You just gotta love that. And so, but everything from that to fly fishing, as an example. So they tell us what they want to do, and we do our best to match their preferences with the opportunities that we have. And that's what we do, just all aligning, if you will, desires with opportunities. And so that's where Karina comes in. She's dialing for dollars, and she's interacting with the heroes all the time. It's a full-time job. And she's doing a great job at that. And I want to, give her a shout out for all of her hard work. And, I hear a lot from the heroes themselves, and many others, what a great job she's doing. So that's good. All right. And so the operations order, that's next. Once we've got the plan, an operations order's got 5 paragraphs, typically 6 now if you want to count safety. And I think we even added a 7th with, the pandemic and the Rona. But anyway, the basic components of that are, the situation. We talk about the weather. We talk about the terrain. We talk about, the environment that they're going to, see when they get there. And then the mission. All good missions have at least in military lingo, have basic components. The mission statement is near and dear to my heart, and I think all businesses should have a good mission statement, and I think we certainly do. And thou shalt not stray from that. And if you do, you can change your mission. You got to change a few other things too, right? But we haven't changed our mission of providing world-class outdoor sporting activities to our nation's combat wounded Purple Heart recipients in 17 years, and that's just a segment of the mission statement. But it contains the essential components of the who, what, where, when, and why, and the purpose. Why are we doing it? Okay, so that's all in there. They're used to that language. They like it, and that shows up And then the third paragraph is execution. How are we going to do this? And we usually have a daily schedule, day 1 through, 4 or 5, whatever it is. And we outline that by hour. We leave plenty of time in there, flex time and this kind of thing, so that we can, react to the circumstances and the situation as it's changing often, based on lots of things like weather and events that could not, be foreseen. So anyway, there's always enough wiggle room in there and for creativity and some downtime and this kind of thing. But then, paragraph 4 is our service and support, and it talks about lodging, it talks about meals, it talks about what to bring in your packing list and all this kind of thing. And then paragraph 5, is your signal and communications, right? Okay, so who are you going to call? What are the numbers? All of this, linking up instructions with your guide. And there's tasks in there too, tasks to the guides, tasks to the hosts. That's all in paragraph 3. So, these things are like 5, 6, 7, 8 pages long, and it's sent out to the heroes and the host and select community members a couple weeks prior to execution. So there's our operations. I'm giving you the formula to Coke. Okay, that's how we do it. And it seems to be working. It has worked very, very well. And super proud of everybody who's part of this process. But as I said earlier in the podcast, I think the key to this thing is to reduce anxieties for the heroes and uncertainty, or the uncertainties that create anxiety, right? Most of them hate to fly. They hate the whole, experience of flying, which, I can understand. I don't like flying. It's you're dealing with the airports 9 times out of 10, is not really a pleasant experience. And so I understand that. So we do what we can to, reduce the uncertainty. Our guides, and I'll talk about the guides in a second here, but the guides that we have are there when they assemble at the airport. When they fly in, we have a guide there. Okay, or maybe sometimes the host is there, and we're there to receive them, and that's their reception. Hey, welcome to Wisconsin. Yeah, welcome to Florida. Wherever you might be, we're there. When you get there, we assemble, and then we provide ground transportation to the host site. Okay, which sometimes that might be a 30-minute drive, and sometimes it might be up to 2 or 3 hours, depending on where we are in the world. Some of these sites are quite remote. So that's really kind of cool, because when you're driving with a car or truckload of dudes and dudettes, you can't help but get to know each other. And so there's a lot of ice breaking and, forming, storming, and norming that's going on that helps reduce some of that tension. But by the time they usually get to the site, we've broke the ice, and the guys are telling all kinds of stories. And, I've even had guys take their legs off, in my truck and go, hey, sir, you mind, I take this off? I'm like, absolutely, man. I can understand you've been flying. It's a little uncomfortable. Take it off, And so, you just got to be prepared for anything. But if they feel comfortable enough to do something like that, you're probably doing pretty good. But, the guides, I'm going to talk about that. That could probably be a podcast in itself. But, we have 21 guides, WWIA certified guides, trained and certified guides on our staff. Okay, well, what does that mean? Well, we have a guide school. It's anywhere from 7 to 10 days. We do it every other year, and these guides are hand selected by the current set of guides. If there's an outstanding hero that has expressed interest in our work and has what we think are the right qualities to do this type of work, then he's essentially recruited. Okay, and there's lots of gates and wickets that they have to go through to get on the team, to actually even just to get to our guide school, which I think is the finest guide school on the planet. All right, it's amazing. Well, I mean, really amazing, and it's taught, oh, by the way, by our current cadre of guides, and of course, other subject matter experts that we need to bring in, like John Rogers and in the Maine's Master Guide program, as an example. We do CPR, we do life-saving measures, we do everything from how to handle a guy that's not doing good. Maybe he's just not all there and needs some support or some help. We do that. But these are guides that are trained in all of our discipline. They're trained in big game hunting. They're trained in dangerous game hunting. They're trained in upland bird fishing, fresh and salt water. Okay, it's an amazing guide school. It really genuinely is. And they graduate. They take a test. Several tests actually. And when you come out of that guide school, you're ready to rock. But before you go on a mission, even before you get to guide school, you're out there rubbing elbows with a current guide, right seat riding and learning the ropes, and so there's this process involved before you even get to guide school. All right, so rest assured that the guides that are running these activities are the best of the best. They're amazing people. They're high IQ, high EQ. They're in it to win it. They're not getting paid. They're shepherding these operations, and they're the critical link between the host, the foundation, and the heroes themselves, our customer, our client. So very, very important thing. These are peers leading peers, where once upon a time it was yours truly out there doing it. And, that model was good to get it off the ground. But, to sustain it and to see it into the future, we need to pivot a little bit. And, the only way I thought that could be done effectively was by putting professionalizing a cadre of guides that are, doing this mission. Okay. And that's where we are today. And so it's all good. You could expect as a host to be, communicated, to have several people in our organization, communicate with you, Karina for sure when you're planning it. Sometimes me on circumstances where it was requested or I thought it was important to do so, I'll reach out, and then the guide before the event is probably going to reach out to you, and he's certainly going to reach out to all the heroes. Hey, Steve, this is John. How are you? John from Wounded Warriors in Action Foundation. How are you? Good. Hey, listen, we got a mission coming up in a week. Just wanted to touch base with you. Make sure you're comfortable and didn't have any questions, and yada yada yada, hama. That's how that works, and then get it established by text, which is what most people use to communicate today, and it's all good. So anyway, I wanted to mention that. Now, let's just talk just for a second about the event and the community, because I go back to the quotation, to the testimonial that I mentioned to kick off the podcast here. This Vietnam veteran some 10 years ago, writing me a personal note after an event and saying, hey, listen, what you're doing is super important for lots of reasons, but one of the reasons that he felt was super important to highlight was this idea of getting non-veterans involved. Okay. And we do, that's who predominantly fills out our ranks in the volunteer category for sure, is, our civilians, non-military folks who've embraced this. And why have they embraced it? Mostly, I think, because many of them did not serve. Maybe wanted to serve or had somebody in their family that served, or couldn't serve, but just respect or didn't want to serve. That's fine. I don't care what your reason is for not having served. It's such a small percent of our society anyway. It's like 7% of people in our society ever wore our country's uniform, whether it was Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine, Coast Guard, Space Force, fill in the blank, so anyway, it's super important that folks who are interested in supporting what we're doing reach out to us, take that first step, and then from there it's just it's easy. We make it super easy. So, but what I wanted to say about what's really important about that, I think, is this idea of being embraced by a community that you don't know, right? Think about that. You went off, you fought in a war. Sometimes these guys are on 7, 8, 9. I even had a guy last year with 14 deployments. 14 combat deployments. That just blows me away. We were at that, it was their country's longest war. It even surpassed the length, of Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. Unbelievable, right? 14 deployments. It just blows me away. But anyway, you come back to this country, right? And, Yeah, you go on one combat deployment and you come back home and everything's changed. It's just everything is different, and I'll probably do a podcast in the future about that. But you can't be the same person after you go out and do do the things that have to be done in combat, And so when you come back here and people you don't know, this is the thing. Okay, people you don't know are opening up their homes and their hearts, their land, their resource, and saying in their way, the American sportsman, in their way, thank you. Thank you for what you did. All right, I'm going to cook you this great meal. I'm going to give you access to my prime property. I'm going to do everything I can to make this a memorable event. Okay, and I think that's super important, right? Positive memories. Right. That's how you supplant, and suppress bad memories. They can be replaced with good memories. And I think, actually, I know that, when people who you don't know in communities you've never been to are saying thank you in that kind of way, inside it does something to you. It makes you feel like, wow, what I did, was valued. And that's all they want. Nobody wants to go do that job. It might look glorious on TV with all the glorification that you see in war movies, but it's not. It's not that way. It's oftentimes horrific. And that right there, those memories are going to be with these guys forever. All right, they just don't go away. You can't push a race. All right, and so to come back here. And even to juxtapose that with what happened, in when the guys came back, from Vietnam, fast forward the tape 40 years and things have changed. Thank God, thank God that the vast majority of our society, has welcomed these great Americans home. There's all kinds of programs and things for them, and it's great. It's really, really great. So anyway, I think psychologically there's something very, very powerful and positive about that welcoming. Coming to a place, coming to a community, meeting people you don't know, and who are, just opening up their hearts and their homes and their resource to say, thank you, welcome home. What you did was valued, okay? And that continues to this day, and you can't do enough of it. So if you're interested in getting involved, by all means, do that. Reach out to us. So the other thing I wanted to say, which is kind of interesting here, and I have to credit one of our hosts, Shelley Cohen, for this, but she talked about the table, okay, as in the kitchen table, as a metaphor, you're not going to be judged. Okay, and that's the thing about this space. It's safe. You say, well, what are you doing? Well, you're out there hunting and fishing. Yeah, not so. Yes, but that's it's sort of incidental. All right. I mean, it's the attractor. Yes, we're hunting, and yes, we're fishing, and yes, these guys are going home with game, meat, protein for their family, and for the most part, if they were successful, and that's a very important piece to this, no doubt about it. But the vast majority of the time on these missions is not spent in a tree. Okay, it's spent in getting to know people and sharing stories and letting your guard down and maybe venting or maybe exercising the demons, in a way that makes you somehow more whole. Okay, that's what's happening on these events, mostly because they feel safe. And our guides have seen it, been there, and done that. They're all combat wounded. Our guides are 100% combat wounded Purple Heart recipients that we took from our ranks, the best of the best. And like I said, they're trained. Okay, and so they're there to facilitate. They're there to run interference if it ever needed to be run. They're there to help a hero who's got a crossbow that he's not familiar with or she's not familiar with because the host said, don't worry about it, I got crossbows. Well, okay, that briefs well. Okay, but how do you really handle this thing? Like how do you render it, effective and safe? How do you properly discharge it? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we're dealing with firearms for the most part, most of the time. And so that's what these guides do. They're masters of none but jacks of all kinds of trade. if you will. And so anyway, I wanted to talk about the table as the metaphor for a second, because I think, and God bless you, Shelley, for bringing it up, because, the table is really important. It really, really is. That those meals in the evening, when we're all sitting around a table and breaking bread together, and you become like a family. And that's, it's a missing part in most cases of something that it's a missing piece that helps make them, whole. It helps make them comfortable. And it's just really, I think, a super metaphor. So anyway, there's lots of that kind of thing. And then, of course, there's after the mission, we disband. We say goodbye, to each other. The heroes are taken back to the airport, and we don't ask them to do much. Honestly, other than have a great time, enjoy themselves. We're paying for everything. If you bring in game home and you want to fly it, we're paying the fees for that, for the transportation. If there's processing fees, we're paying for that. There's just, a whole host of things that you might imagine that, to pull this thing off logistically and to do so, properly to a high standard, often takes resource, planning and resources. So, we're doing that, and it's all good. But we ask them, we say, okay, look at, I started this 17 years ago, and I had a journal. I was actually journaling myself. And I had this leather-bound journal, and I was sort of, I was up there at Camp Hackett in Wisconsin. I was writing about what I was doing, and I eventually I was like, why don't I let the heroes, write in this book? And so that's what I started doing. I said I'd bring them all together on day one, and I'd say, look, and I'm not going to ask you to, I'm not really going to ask you to do anything besides enjoy yourself. Okay, that's why we're here. Feel safe, enjoy yourself. This is your weekend. If you want to stay in, if you don't want to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and go duck hunting with us, and you want to stay in bed and hang out here in camp with me, you can do that. All right, I'm all good with it. But the only thing I'm going to ask you to do, besides get to know your buddy and have some fun, is write in this journal. And all I'm going to ask you to do before you leave is scribble some things down on one of these pages and tell me about your experience, okay? And everyone says yes, and they all do it, and they pass around the journals. So I filled up 3 journals eventually, and then, with the guides, we ended up getting them all journals. The hosts have journals, so there's tons and tons of, first-person testimonies. You want to know whether or not our stuff is working? You want to know whether or not, we're doing good? Read the testimonials. They'll blow you away. Some of them I can't read. I get all, I start blowing snot bubbles, you get hair stands up on my arms, and I'm just like, whoa, that hits home. But go to the website, check out the testimonials. I think there's over 1,000 of them there. All right, first-person testimonials, and so they do that, and then we ask them to do a survey. The survey is only something we've done in the last year and a half. It's coming to a conclusion. We're working with Cornell University and Dr. Keith Tidball, who I hope to have on the show here sometime soon. But, Keith's done an amazing job, and so has Cornell University. Amazing job supporting the foundation to try to understand what it is. Why is it that what we're doing is working? What is it about what we're doing that's working? It's a scientific study, with a short survey that the heroes take before they disband. And that data, I got to tell you, I've already looked at it, sample set of it. We've been at it for a year collecting data. And so we've just got a ton of it, and it's all extremely positive. Okay. We thought we needed some primary data. Actually, we knew we did, because a lot of these people that are, granting money, large philanthropic organizations always ask, how do you know that what you're doing is actually working? Do you have quantifiable data? And so, we instead of, doing research, we just thought we'd create our own data, but had to do so with Cornell University for legitimacy purposes. And of course, surveys have got to be devised a certain way to be accurate and accepted scientifically. So we did all that. Thank you, Keith. And so that's the other thing we ask them to do. And so, that's all out there. Now, what do we do after? So here's the wind up, the pitch, and then the follow through. Okay. So, the follow through here, as I wind this podcast down, is, we, the foundation, the inside team, do what we call AARs and hot washes. And an AAR is an after action review. And a hot wash is sort of a chat, okay, that facilitates the formal AAR. And so Karina and the host and the guide all get on the phone and they chat about what happened. Good, what was 3 things that were good, 3 things that needed to be improved, sort of thing, that format. But in language that most business people might get or understand, it would be, to cap. Why do we do that? All right, and that's my question. Why do we do that? Well, I'll tell you. We do that to capture the best business practices, and we go, I didn't think about that. Or, oh, okay, that's a good idea. Let's do that next year. And oh, by the way, I think like 99, it's high. I don't have a statistic, but I know it's like as high as like 95% or higher of the hosts that do an event do another event and they're repeat customers. The hosts are. And these are volunteers, people that have reached out to us, as I said earlier. But there's an amazing success rate, the successful repeatable process. That's what you're after in business. And I don't care if you're making widgets or you're providing services for combat wounded, that's your success formula. You got to find the formula. You got to dial in on it. You got to make modifications as you need to. But once you get the formula for Coke, keep it. And just drill on it. And that's what we do or attempt to do. And the AAR hot wash is part of that to capture best business practices. Okay. And then we rinse and repeat. And that's what we do. And so anyway, I wanted to just, touch on here, what is it that we're doing? How's it work? I got that question a lot. So, I really hope this podcast was informative. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly appreciate you listening to me run my gums, flap my cake hole. And your support's super important to us. And we thank you for all that you do. And I certainly appreciate your time. I hope you have a great day. Thank you.
To learn more about the mission of the Wounded Warriors in Action Foundation and how you can get involved, please visit our website at WWIAF.org or follow our social media pages on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Thank you for listening to the WWIA Podcast and for helping us honor, connect, and heal our combat wounded Purple Heart heroes through the power of the great outdoors.
If you like what you're listening to here and would like to join our team in our mission to bring healing power and recovery to America's Purple Heart heroes, please become part of our Sponsor a Hero team by clicking on the link in the podcast notes or by going to WWIAF.org/sponsor. That's WWIAF.org/sponsor. Our heroes need you now more than ever. Thank you.